This $1 ranch just became a battlefield.
Ethan Riley stood on the precipice of something that seemed impossible. A sprawling 100-acre ranch purchased for a single dollar. The weathered wooden fence, bleached almost white by the relentless afternoon sun, stretched towards the horizon, disappearing into the shimmering heat haze. In the distance, the main house sat forlorn, a forgotten prayer in the landscape, a testament to years of neglect. 3 hours after pushing open that creaking, groaning front door, a reality far different from the broker's assurances hit him with the force of a physical blow. Someone was already living there. The sound preceded any sight, soft footsteps above, deliberate and cautious, the careful tread of someone desperately trying to remain unheard. Ethan froze, his hand still gripping the cool brass of the doorknob, his carefully constructed expectations shattering around him. The house was supposed to be empty. Caleb had sworn on it, his hand firm in the land-office handshake, his eyes darting nervously away from Ethan's unwavering gaze. "Nobody's been in that place for years," Caleb had insisted, his voice tinged with a nervous energy that Ethan hadn't noticed at the time. "You'll have it all to yourself." Yet, there she was. A young woman emerged at the top of the wooden staircase, her dark hair cascading around her shoulders, a simple dress, worn but clean, clinging to her slender frame. She didn't scream, didn't flee. Instead, she regarded him with an expression that baffled him. Not fear, but a quiet, almost weary resignation, as if this moment had been anticipated for a very long time. "You must be the new owner," she stated, her voice remarkably steady considering the circumstances. "I'm Willow Hayes. I've been taking care of this place." Ethan's mind raced, struggling to reconcile the reality before him with the deal he'd just finalized. Taking care of it? For who? And why hadn't Caleb mentioned her? He scrutinized her face, searching for any trace of deception, but found only a quiet strength, a resilience that echoed the unwavering spirit of his own mother during her darkest days. "The seller didn't say anything about anyone living here," he managed, the words feeling inadequate, clumsy, in the face of the unexpected situation. Willow descended the stairs slowly, each step measured and graceful, a stark contrast to the frantic turmoil within Ethan. "Boone Carter doesn't know everything about this ranch," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "There are things about this land that go deeper than what's written on any deed." She moved to the window, her fingers gently pulling back the faded curtain, revealing the boundless expanse of grassland stretching beyond the property line. "I've been here for 3 years. This place saved my life when I had nowhere else to go. I've kept the roof patched, the well clean, and the fences mended. I suppose you could say we've been taking care of each other." Ethan felt the meticulously planned foundation of his future shifting beneath his feet. He'd scrimped and saved for 5 years, every penny channeled towards this dream, to own his own land, to build a life free from the constraints of his past. This ranch, despite its dilapidated state, represented everything he'd ever longed for. But now, standing in this dusty room with this unexpected woman, he realized his $1 purchase had brought him something far more complex, far more profound than mere property. "Why did Carter sell it so cheap?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, a premonition whispering that the answer would irrevocably alter the course of his life. Willow turned from the window, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine fear crossed her features, a fleeting vulnerability that only intensified the gravity of the situation. "Because," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the whisper of the wind, "he's not the only one who knows I'm here." The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air, a palpable sense of danger that chilled Ethan to the bone. The afternoon sun, slanting through the dusty windows, cast long shadows across Willow's face, accentuating the weight of secrets pressing down on her slender shoulders. "Who's coming for you?" Ethan asked, his voice steady despite the growing unease tightening his chest. Willow moved away from the window, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her knuckles bone white. "Men who believe I took something that belongs to them," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Something valuable enough that they've been hunting me for 3 years." "Did you take it?" Ethan's question was direct, his gaze unwavering. He saw no hint of deception in her eyes, only a deep, abiding sorrow. "I took something, yes," she replied, her voice laced with a pain that spoke of old wounds, of injustices suffered. "But it belonged to me long before they ever laid claim to it." Her words painted a picture of loss, of a life irrevocably altered by greed and betrayal. "My father's gold claim. He died in a mining accident. And these men showed up with forged papers, claiming he owed them everything. They took our house, our land, everything we had." Ethan recognized the haunted look in her eyes. The look of someone pushed beyond their breaking point. The same desolate reflection he'd seen in his own mirror during the agonizing years following his wife's death. "So, you took back what was yours," he murmured, understanding dawning in his mind, a chilling realization of the precariousness of Willow's situation. "I took the original deed and the survey maps proving our claim was legitimate," Willow confirmed, her voice barely a whisper. "Documents that would destroy their operation if they ever saw the inside of a courthouse." A bitter laugh escaped her lips, a sound filled with the despair of a woman perpetually on the run. But getting to a courthouse alive is the challenge. The rhythmic thud of approaching hooves shattered the tense silence, making both Ethan and Willow freeze. Willow dashed to the window, cautiously parting the curtain just enough to peer outside. Ethan joined her, their hearts pounding in unison as they watched 3 riders approach along the main trail. They were still too distant to make out clearly, but close enough to know their intentions weren't friendly, their presence an undeniable threat. "Is that them?" Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible above the pounding of his own blood in his ears. Willow shook her head. "No," she paused, studying the approaching riders more carefully. "But that's strange. Those horses are moving too fast for casual travelers, but too slow for urgency, like they're searching for something." Ethan felt a knot of apprehension tighten in his stomach. He'd bought this ranch to escape complications, to build a simple life on his own terms, to find solace and peace. But watching those distant figures approach, he realized his $1 investment had plunged him into something far more dangerous, far more treacherous than he could have ever imagined. "I should go," Willow said suddenly, turning away from the window, her voice laced with a quiet desperation. "I've already brought too much trouble to this place. You don't deserve to get caught up in my problems." "Where would you go?" Ethan asked, the question surprising even himself. 3 hours ago, he'd never known of her existence. She hesitated, a flicker of vulnerability betraying her carefully constructed composure. And in that moment of uncertainty, he saw the truth. She had nowhere left to run. The riders were getting closer, their intentions still unknown, but their presence undeniably menacing. "How long before the dangerous ones find you here?" he pressed, needing to understand the imminence of the danger. Willow looked back toward the approaching riders, then met his gaze, her eyes reflecting the fear that threatened to consume her. "If those men down there are who I think they are," she said quietly, her voice barely a breath, "they already have." The riders drew closer, their faces now discernible. Hard men, their faces etched with the harsh lines of years spent taking what they wanted, regardless of the cost. They reined in their horses about 50 yards from the house, close enough to be a threat, but far enough to avoid immediate confrontation. "That's Dale Miller," Willow whispered, her voice tight with recognition. "He works for the Maddox brothers." "If he's here, it means they finally tracked me down." Ethan watched as the three men spread out in a loose semicircle, effectively blocking the main escape routes from the property. Their movements were practiced, coordinated, not random drifters, but hunters who'd found their prey. "What exactly did you take from them?" he asked, needing to understand the stakes, the nature of the conflict he'd inadvertently stumbled into. Willow moved away from the window and knelt beside a loose floorboard near the fireplace. With quick, efficient movements, she pried it up, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. When she stood, she held a small leather pouch and a rolled bundle of papers. "The deed to the richest gold claim in the territory," she said, unrolling one of the documents, revealing intricately detailed survey maps showing the precise location of the ore veins. "My father spent 10 years mapping every vein, every pocket of gold in those hills." The Maddox brothers killed him for it, then discovered he'd hidden the real documents. Ethan studied the intricate drawings on the map, noting the careful notations and detailed measurements. This wasn't just a claim, it was a treasure map, drawn by someone who knew every inch of the land. "This is worth a fortune," he murmured, his voice filled with awe and a dawning understanding of the danger Willow faced. "Enough to buy half the territory," Willow confirmed, her voice tinged with a bitter irony, "and enough to make them hunt me across 3 states. A sharp whistle from outside made them both turn toward the window. Dale Miller had dismounted and was walking slowly toward the house, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. His companions remained mounted, watching the surrounding area for any signs of movement. "Willow Hayes!" Miller called out, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "We know you're in there." "Time to settle this like civilized people." Ethan felt his pulse quicken. 3 years of carpentry work had given him strong hands and a steady nerve, but he'd never faced men like these. Still, looking at Willow's pale face, he realized he couldn't simply hand her over to them. "There's a back way out," she whispered urgently. "Through the kitchen and down to the creek. You could slip away while they're focused on the front of the house." "What about you?" Ethan asked, concern lacing his voice. She smiled sadly, a gesture that belied the strength of her spirit. "I'm tired of running. Maybe it's time to face them." Ethan stared at her, recognizing the quiet resignation in her voice. She was giving up, ready to sacrifice herself so he could escape the mess his $1 purchase had created. But as Miller's footsteps approached the front porch, echoing like a countdown, Ethan made a decision that surprised even him. "No," he said firmly, moving to the window, his resolve hardening. "This is my property now, and I don't recall inviting anyone onto it." Miller stopped at the base of the porch steps, looking up at the house with a cold smile that promised violence. Ethan stepped onto the front porch, making sure Miller could see him clearly. The afternoon sun cast his shadow long across the weathered boards, and he kept his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "This is private property," he called out, his voice firm, projecting an authority he didn't quite feel. "You and your friends need to move along." Miller's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. Well, now it looks like the little lady found herself a protector. He took another step closer, his spurs jangling with each movement. "Thing is, friend, we're not here for trouble with you. Just need to have a conversation with Miss Hayes about some property that belongs to our employer." "I don't see any legal papers," Ethan replied, his gaze sweeping over Miller's companions, noting how they'd positioned themselves to cover all angles of approach. "Far as I know, anything on this ranch belongs to me now." Miller chuckled, a sound like gravel in a tin cup. "Legal papers, that's funny." He gestured toward the house. "See, the way we figure it, Miss Hayes has been squatting on this land for years, probably going through anything of value left behind by the previous owners. Wouldn't be surprised if she found some items that need to be returned to their rightful owners." Inside the house, Ethan could hear Willow moving quietly, hopefully hiding the documents somewhere safer. He needed to buy her time, but Miller was clearly growing impatient with the conversation. Tell you what, Miller continued, his hand now resting openly on his gun handle. Why don't you call her out here so we can all discuss this like reasonable folks? No need for anyone to get hurt over a simple misunderstanding. Ethan felt sweat gathering at the base of his neck despite the cooling afternoon air. 3 against 1 weren't odds any sensible man would take, especially when he wasn't even sure what he was fighting for. But looking at Miller's cold eyes, he realized this wasn't about justice or legal claims. These men would take what they wanted, regardless of who got hurt in the process. She's not here, he lied, hoping his voice sounded more convincing than it felt. Miller's expression darkened. Now that's interesting, because my associate over there with the sharp eyes swears he saw 2 figures in that window not 5 minutes ago. He pointed toward one of the mounted men. Johnny's got a talent for noticing details others might miss. The man called Johnny tipped his hat mockingly. His rifle rested casually across his saddle but positioned for quick use. Maybe you saw shadows, Ethan suggested, trying to buy more time. Old houses play tricks with the light. Maybe, Miller agreed, though his tone suggested he believed nothing of the sort. Or maybe you're protecting someone who's caused my employer's considerable financial loss. That kind of loyalty to a stranger might make a man wonder about your own involvement in the situation. The threat was clear now. Miller was suggesting that Ethan himself might be complicit in whatever theft they were pursuing. It was a clever move. Give him a way out by abandoning Willow or face the consequences of standing with her. Through the window behind him, Ethan heard the softest creak of floorboards. Willow was still moving around inside, and Miller's sharp-eyed companion would notice any sound that carried. Time's running short, Miller said, pulling out a pocket watch and making a show of checking it. My patience tends to wear thin when folks aren't being honest with me. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope, ready to snap. Ethan could feel Miller studying his face, searching for cracks in his resolve. Behind him, the house had gone completely quiet. Too quiet. Either Willow had found the perfect hiding spot, or she was preparing for something desperate. You know what? I think, Miller said, closing his pocket watch with a sharp click, I think you bought this place knowing exactly what you'd find here. Maybe Miss Hayes promised you a share of what she stole if you helped her stay hidden. You think wrong, Ethan replied, though he had to admit the accusation sounded plausible. I bought this ranch fair and square this morning. First time I've ever set foot on this property. Miller exchanged glances with his mounted companions, some silent communication passing between them. The man called Johnny shifted in his saddle, and Ethan caught the subtle movement of his hand toward his rifle. Here's what's going to happen, Miller announced, his voice taking on the tone of a man accustomed to being obeyed. You're going to step aside, and we're going to search this house. When we find what we're looking for, we'll be on our way. Resist, and you'll be buried on your own property before sunset. Ethan's mouth went dry, but he held his ground. And if I refuse? Miller's smile returned, colder than before. Then we'll search it anyway, and you won't be around to complain about the mess we make. The front door opened behind Ethan with a soft creak, and he felt his heart stop. Willow stepped out onto the porch, her chin raised defiantly despite the obvious fear in her eyes. She'd changed into riding clothes, a small pack slung over her shoulder. Enough, she said firmly. This man has nothing to do with our business, Miller. Let's settle this between us. Miller's expression shifted to one of satisfaction, like a hunter who'd finally cornered his prey. There's the sensible approach. Step down here, Miss Hayes, and we can discuss terms. The terms are simple, Willow replied, staying close to Ethan's side. You let him go, and I'll come with you willingly. No violence, no threats, just me for his safety. Ethan turned to stare at her. You don't have to. Yes, I do, she cut him off softly. You've already done more than anyone had a right to expect. Miller clapped his hands together once, the sound sharp in the afternoon air. See how easy that was? Now, about those documents you took. What documents? Willow asked, her voice steady, a deceptive calm masking the turmoil within. The ones that prove our employer's legitimate claim to the Hayes mine, Miller said patiently. The papers your father hid before his unfortunate accident. My father died in a cave-in caused by your employer's unsafe mining practices, Willow shot back, her voice sharp, defiant. There were no documents to hide. Miller's facade of civility began to crack. Don't play games with me, girl. We know you have them, and we know they're here. The only question is whether we tear this place apart board by board to find them. Willow met his gaze steadily, but Ethan could see her hands trembling slightly. Whatever documents she'd shown him were her only leverage, and she was about to lose them. That's when the sound of more approaching riders echoed across the valley, coming fast from the eastern trail. Miller spun toward the sound of approaching hoofbeats, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon. The new riders were still distant, but they were coming hard and fast, dust rising in their wake like a brown cloud against the horizon. "Johnny!" Miller barked to his sharp-eyed companion. "How many?" The man squinted into the distance, shading his eyes with one hand. 4 riders, maybe 5. Can't make out who they are from here, but they're pushing their horses hard." Miller's jaw tightened. Could be trouble. He turned back to Willow, his earlier patience completely gone. "Change of plans. We're taking you and those documents now before whoever that is decides to complicate things." "I told you I don't have any documents," Willow insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. "Search the house," Miller ordered his men. "Tear it apart if you have to." Ethan stepped forward, blocking the porch steps. "You're not going anywhere near my house." Miller's gun cleared its holster so fast Ethan barely saw the movement. The cold metal pressed against his forehead, and he could smell the gun oil and leather from Miller's gloves. "Last chance to be smart about this," Miller growled. "Stand aside or I'll put you down right here." The approaching riders were closer now, close enough that their individual horses could be distinguished. Ethan could see they were riding in formation, disciplined and purposeful, not random travelers, but men with a mission. "Dale Miller!" The shout came from the lead rider, still 200 yards away, but closing fast. "Step away from those people!" Miller's eyes widened in recognition. "Damn," he muttered under his breath. "Friends of yours?" Willow asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Sheriff Garcia," Miller replied through gritted teeth. "Someone must have sent word ahead." He glanced back at his companions, who were looking increasingly nervous about their exposed position. The riders thundered closer, and Ethan could now make out the distinctive glint of badge metal on the lead rider's vest, a sheriff and his deputies riding like they meant business. But Miller's gun was still pressed against Ethan's skull, and his finger was tight on the trigger. "This complicates things," Miller said more to himself than anyone else. "But it doesn't change what needs to happen here." Sheriff Garcia and his men were within shouting distance now, their horses lathered with sweat from the hard ride. The sheriff was a lean man with gray whiskers and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years dealing with situations exactly like this one. "Drop your weapons," Garcia called out as his group fanned out in a semicircle around Miller's men. "Nobody needs to die today." Miller pressed the gun harder against Ethan's forehead. "Maybe nobody needs to die," he called back. "But that depends on whether you're willing to let justice take its course." "Justice?" Garcia laughed harshly. "Is that what you call hunting down an innocent woman across 3 territories?" Miller's face darkened. "That woman is a thief who's been harboring stolen property. We're here on behalf of legitimate business interests to recover what belongs to them." "The Maddox brothers' business interests," Sheriff Garcia corrected, his voice dripping with disgust. "I've seen enough of their version of justice to know what it looks like." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Miller's men were outnumbered now, but they still held the advantage of having hostages. Ethan could feel sweat trickling down his back as he tried to remain perfectly still with the gun barrel pressed against his skin. "Here's what's going to happen," Miller announced, his voice carrying across the yard. "Miss Hayes and I are going to have a private conversation about those documents. Anyone who interferes will watch this brave property owner pay the price." Sheriff Garcia held up one hand, signaling his deputies to hold their positions. The standoff stretched taut like a wire about to snap, everyone waiting for someone else to make the first move that would determine who lived and who died. "Miller," the sheriff said carefully, "you're making a mistake here. The Maddox brothers don't own this territory, and they sure don't own me." "Maybe not," Miller replied, never taking his eyes off Garcia while keeping the gun pressed firmly against Ethan's head. "But they own enough judges and politicians to make your life very difficult if you interfere with legitimate business." Willow stepped forward slightly, drawing Miller's attention. "Stop this," she said firmly. "You want the documents? Fine. They're hidden under the loose floorboard by the fireplace, wrapped in oiled cloth." Ethan felt his heart sink. She was giving up the only leverage she had, throwing away 3 years of careful hiding to save a man she'd met hours ago. Miller's eyes lit up with triumph, but he didn't lower his weapon. "Johnny, get in there and find them, and be careful. Miss Hayes has proven herself quite creative when it comes to hiding things." The sharp-eyed rider dismounted and moved toward the porch, but Sheriff Garcia's voice stopped him cold. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." "Hey, Johnny," Garcia called out. "See? I've got a warrant here for Dale Miller's arrest on charges of murder, robbery, and conspiracy. Anyone who helps him is looking at being an accessory after the fact." Johnny froze on the bottom step, looking back at Miller uncertainly. "You didn't say nothing about murder charges, Dale." "Shut up and get those papers," Miller snarled. But Ethan could hear the edge of panic creeping into his voice. "The murder of Thomas Hayes," Sheriff Garcia continued, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "Willow's father. Seems we found a witness who saw you and the Maddox brothers rig that mine cave-in. Man's been hiding in fear for 3 years, but he finally decided to come forward." The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Willow gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Someone saw what happened to my father?" "Old Pete Harden," Garcia confirmed. "He was working a claim upstream when he saw Miller and 2 other men tampering with the support beams in your father's mine. Says they knew exactly when Thomas would be going down for his afternoon check." Miller's face had gone pale, but his grip on the gun remained steady. "That drunk's testimony won't hold up in any court." "Maybe not," Garcia agreed. "But combined with those documents Miss Hayes has been protecting, the ones that prove her father's legitimate claim to the mine, it's enough to hang all 3 of you." Ethan felt the gun barrel tremble slightly against his skin. Miller was realizing that killing witnesses wasn't going to solve his problem anymore, not with a sheriff and 4 deputies watching every move. "Johnny!" Miller barked. "I said get those papers!" But Johnny was already backing away from the porch, his hands raised peacefully. "Sorry, Dale, but I didn't sign up for a hanging offense. I'm done." The third rider, a younger man who'd been silent until now, suddenly spurred his horse and bolted toward the tree line, apparently deciding that retreat was the better part of valor. Miller found himself suddenly alone, outnumbered, and facing charges that would see him dancing at the end of a rope. His breathing became rapid and shallow, the kind of panic that made desperate men do dangerous things. "This isn't over," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Then, louder, "Even if you take me in, the Maddox brothers will never stop hunting her. Those documents are worth too much." "Maybe," Sheriff Garcia said, slowly dismounting and taking a step closer. "But that's tomorrow's problem." Today's problem is you putting down that gun." Before someone got hurt, Miller's hand trembled noticeably. Ethan watched in growing horror, realizing Miller was about to make a decision that would cost them all their lives. Miller's desperation reached a breaking point. With a ferocious snarl, he shoved Ethan aside and swung his gun at Sheriff Garcia. The sudden violent movement threw him off balance. Ethan, stumbling, managed a desperate sideways dive off the porch just as the first shot rang out. Garcia's deputies reacted with practiced, almost instantaneous precision. 2 shots answered Miller's, and the outlaw collapsed to the ground, his weapons spinning uselessly in the dust. The entire confrontation lasted mere seconds, leaving only the lingering echoes of gunfire and the acrid smell of gunpowder hanging heavy in the afternoon air. "Is everyone all right?" Garcia shouted, his weapon still trained on Miller's still form. Ethan hauled himself up from behind a wooden crate, checking for injuries. He found only bruised ribs, thankfully nothing worse. Willow rushed down from the porch, her face pale but resolute. "I'm fine," she said, her gaze falling upon Miller. "Is he dead?" "Caught him square in the chest," one of the deputies confirmed after checking for a pulse. Sheriff Garcia holstered his weapon and turned to Willow, his expression one of genuine, heartfelt sympathy. "Miss Hayes, I'm sorry it took so long to get justice for your father. If you're willing to testify about those documents and what happened to your family, we can finally bring the Maddox brothers to justice." Willow nodded, brushing away tears. "I've been waiting 3 years to tell someone who would listen. The documents are in the house," she continued, glancing at Ethan. "Everything my father recorded about the mine, including irrefutable proof that the Maddox brothers forged the papers claiming ownership." 2 hours later, after statements were taken and evidence meticulously gathered, Sheriff Garcia and his men rode away, carrying Miller's body and a promise to return within the week to escort Willow to the territorial courthouse. The sun dipped below the distant mountains, painting the sky in vibrant shades of orange and purple. Ethan and Willow stood on the porch, watching the dust settle in the wake of the departing riders. The silence between them was now comfortable, no longer burdened by secrets and looming threats. "So," Ethan began, "I suppose you'll be leaving once this is all settled." Willow turned to him, a subtle smile playing on her lips. "Where would I go? I've been taking care of this place for 3 years. Seems like a waste to abandon it now." "It's your ranch now," he pointed out, his voice devoid of any challenge. "True," she agreed, "but you bought it for $1, and it came with someone to help run it. Besides," she gestured towards the expansive grassland beyond the house, "this place is big enough for 2 people who don't mind working hard." Ethan considered this, reflecting on the solitary years he'd spent diligently saving for his own land, dreaming of building something lasting and enduring. He'd envisioned doing it alone, but standing there with Willow, watching the last rays of sunlight fade over their shared horizon, he realized some things are indeed better built together. "Partners?" he asked, extending his hand. "Partners," she echoed, her handshake firm and unwavering. As the first stars emerged in the twilight sky, they walked back into the house together, ready to embark on building a life made possible by a $1 ranch and a fortuitous, life-altering encounter. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable story where destiny and courage collide in unexpected and thrilling ways. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these.